Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode. It's a little bit different from some of the episodes that I've recorded in the past. I've got my boyfriend and travel podcast co-host Ryan here today. You want to say hi to the audience, Ryan?
That's all you've got?
No, I'm not done. I just thought...
Continue with my intro, please.
Okay. Ryan is a prestigious young gentleman of the fine age of 26. He's from Naramata, British Columbia, and that's all I've got for you. So you can get on with it then.
Well, we're not here for me.
No, we're not.
So that I can interview you.
Yeah, so Ryan's not a yoga teacher, so he doesn't...
So just ignore everything I'm saying.
He doesn't get to come on the MBO podcast to be, to be interviewed.
Was Mike...
Oh, that's true. I interviewed Mike Michalowicz, and he is also not a yoga teacher. He's like an expert in business, though. Did you just tisk at me? It's my podcast. No, I'm super excited for today's episode. Ryan is interviewing me, so instead of just talking solo about what the last year has been like for me as a yoga teacher, I thought it'd be a little bit more interesting to have somebody who could dialogue with me and ask me questions instead of asking myself questions.
So, Amanda, talk about this. Oh, hey.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. If anyone out there enjoys travel, we have a travel podcast called The World Wanderers, and we're approaching episode 100, perhaps past episode 100 by the time this actually goes live. And so we've recorded quite a few hours of podcasting together. So we're pretty used to talking to one another.
Yes. Affirmative.
Yes. This is the first time that Ryan has interviewed me, though.
Yeah. So should we jump into it?
Yeah. Unless you've got anything else that you want to talk about before.
Well, we're considering what movie to go watch tonight. If anyone has any recommendations, send them our way.
This isn't real time.
Okay. Yeah, no, let's jump into it. So let's start right from the beginning. How did you get into yoga in the first place, Amanda?
That's a great question, Ryan.
I know. Thank you.
So I danced in high school. I did like hip hop, jazz, contemporary ballet, and I did it competitively. I danced like 5 or 6 times a week and competed every year in a number of competitions. And when I went to university in 2007, I was like, I'm not good enough to be a dancer, like a professional dancer. So I kind of just stopped, and I didn't really do very much activity for my first year of university. I'd like occasionally go to the gym. I think a couple friends and I took like a fun sort of Zumba like fitness class before Zumba was actually a thing. And early on in my second year, my mom was like, "Oh, do you want to try yoga with me?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure. That'd be a fun activity for us to do." We picked a studio that was kind of close to where she was living and also close to me. And we started going once a week, and it kind of just encouraged me to exercise, I guess, because I still wasn't exercising super regularly. And I practiced on and off for probably like 4 years, like 2008 to 2012. And it wasn't until you and I returned from our first backpacking trip that I started practicing regularly at a yoga studio in Calgary. And one summer the summer of 2012, I believe it was, I bought an unlimited pass for a yoga studio, and I just went like pretty much every day. And I remember talking to a really good friend of mine who I was practicing with, and she's like, "Do you think you'd ever become a teacher?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I do. That is something that I want to do." It was something that I'd thought about like a few years before. I have no idea why. Like, it's been on my bucket list since I started a bucket list in like 2009, even though I was practicing like once a week. So I don't know. I don't know why it was on there, but it was. And I practiced, regularly from 2012 to 2014, practiced on and off while we were in South America, and then came back in late 2014 and started working at Lululemon. And one of the amazing things about working at Lululemon is that you get free fitness classes. And so I just started practicing yoga like constantly in this really cool yoga community. And it was at that point that I was like, yes,
and
this
so
is what
going
I
to
wanna
that
do.
like first kind of inclination to be a yoga teacher, that was more like you thought that was the route to kind of take your yoga practice to the next level, right? It wasn't like, I want to do this professionally, or was it?
I think it was like, it was never something that I was like, I want to do this 100%. This is all I want to do. I don't think. I think it was like, oh, like I really enjoy, like I learned best through teaching. And I knew that from being in university and being a teaching assistant for one of the marketing classes, which was my major in university, and learning so much more through that teaching experience, and just like loving standing up in front of a group and putting on presentations and review tutorials and stuff like that. So I felt like it was something that I would really like. It's really hard to like think about as to what my actual like intentions or thought patterns were, because I feel like they were so unconscious.
And I think it's pretty natural to be in, like, if you're in a situation and then some other people in that situation are in a different role, I think it's natural to like kind of think of, oh, what would it be like if I was in that role? So like the example is when you're in university, it's pretty natural to think of yourself as like, oh, what would it be like if I was a professor? Would a professor be cool? So if you're in a yoga class, you're natural to think like, oh, it'd be cool to be the yoga teacher instead of the yoga student.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that really kept me coming back to yoga is I'm not very good at sports, and I know a lot of that is like in my head. Part of it is like I'm left-handed and I have a really hard time. Sports are taught like right-handed for the most part, and you're shaking your head at me.
I think that's true.
I feel like it is really hard as a left-handed person. It's a right-handed person's world. Like things are usually taught for right-handed people, but I don't know.
50% of all the people playing professional sports are left-handed.
Really? Is that like 100?
I might have just made that up.
I think you made that up. But I don't think
in hockey and lacrosse especially, there's actually an advantage to being left-handed because you get more opportunities because there's less left-handed people, so you get more time.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great to be like a left-handed golfer because you're never going to not find rental clubs. Like the left-handed clubs are never going to all rent out, even on a busy day. But so something that I found is that like I'm strong with my right hand as well. So I really struggled with sports. Like I could serve a volleyball underhand really well with my left and overhand really well with my right, but it was awkward with both. Same with throwing, golf. And so that combined with having this story in my head that it was like, I'm not good at sports, that was kind of like reinforced. Yeah, that's the word. Reinforced by people in my life. Like, oh yeah, you're not that great at sports. And so I started doing yoga, and because I already had that connection with my body from dance, I already had like body awareness. I feel like I really liked feeling like I was good at something. And I did an episode a couple weeks ago on what does it mean to be good at yoga. And I don't really define being good at yoga as something that's really based on like the physical asana. But at that time when I started practicing and you look around the room and you see all these people, it's really easy to compare yourself. And I was like, oh, I can already touch my toes. Like, oh, I can already go into splits. Like I can already do all these things that a lot of people can't do because I've got this dance background and because I've got this body awareness.
So it was almost like you got good at yoga because you were good at yoga initially. Kind of like a feedback loop.
I guess so, yeah.
I think that's pretty common for a lot of things. Like when you're good at something, it feels good, and then you practice and practice and practice. That's why it can, if someone gives you a compliment early on at something, even if it maybe isn't necessarily true,
yeah,
it can, like, if someone's like, oh wow, you're really good at drawing, and you're like, oh, okay. I thought I sucked, but
be the next Picasso.
I'll keep doing it, and you keep practicing, and eventually you get good.
Yeah, and I think that was the same thing for me. I was told, when I was young, that I wasn't good at sports, and I kind of carried that with me probably like well into my 20s until it's still something that my gut is, I'm not good at sports. Like, I don't want to try that. I'm not going to be good at it. And I have to really kind of wind that back and be aware of it and be like, okay, I could probably be good at it if I practiced. Because although my yoga practice was it got good quickly, but it plateaued quickly as well, because to get really like physically strong at asana, you have to practice a lot. And there's still a lot of really advanced poses that I'm not able to do.
And did the thing drawing you to yoga change at all over that 6 years when it was just a recreational activity?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting for me to think back to myself when I first started practicing yoga, because when I first got into yoga, I got into it for the exercise element of it, because I hadn't been exercising very much. And I was probably, maybe 19 going on 20. I was in school. I wasn't eating very well. I was living on my own for the first time, living with friends. And it was the first time where I was kind of like, okay, you know, like my body can change the way it looks if I eat poorly and I don't exercise. And so I remember myself going to yoga classes, and I would be that person who would come up into, you know, like a little cobra or something. I'd be clenching my butt as hard as I could and clenching all the muscles in my legs and really tightening my abs. And then they'd tell us to relax down and let everything settle in the pose. And I would still be like engaging my core, because I wanted to get as much out of that class as I could. And it's interesting because I teach so many students now that are like that. And I really try to encourage those moments of let your body rest, because our bodies really need that. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that's changed for me. Even, you know, a year and a half ago, I was like, I'm going to be like a hard yoga teacher. I'm going to teach like power vinyasa, which I do teach, but I also really love restorative now. And that's something that's really grown with my practice, as I see how big of an impact it has on me physically and mentally. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, sounds like it. So it's like you came into it for the exercise, and then it seems like a common story with yoga where you come into it for exercise or come into it for like an injury rehab thing, and then you kind of grow to fall in love with like the maybe, I don't know, spiritual, I struggle to use that word, but that side of things where it's like the restorative yin, the meditative side of yoga.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, you knew me at that point when I started doing yoga, and I was very high energy, not very present, very concerned about what other people thought of me, pretty low self-esteem, very external, like I based my opinion of myself on the things that people would tell me from the outside. So if somebody said your outfit doesn't look good, it wasn't like, well, you know, go F yourself. I don't really care what you think. It was, oh my gosh, I should probably change. Like they don't think I look good. And so I think that as I've grown as a person, as I've gotten older and wiser, my yoga practice has really grown with me, or vice versa. I don't know which is the chicken, which is the egg, and which one first came first type thing. But now it's not so much. If I want a workout, I'll definitely go to like a power vinyasa or power yoga class, or maybe a hot yoga class. But for the most part, I go to yoga so that I can like stretch and lengthen my muscles, and so that I can relax, and so I can get really clear-headed. I think that's the biggest thing. When I don't practice for a couple of days now, I feel it in my mind more so than my body.
What does it feel like?
Somebody who sporadically practices yoga, you should probably be aware of that. But
well, I find I do yoga very infrequently. Sometimes less infrequently.
You've gone through phases.
Yeah,
you've done it regularly.
A couple times a week, and lately it's been like once a month or once every 3 months. For me though, I don't notice it like, it's like as if you were like slowly walking off course, and you're walking through a trail in the woods, and you're like slowly turning to your left, but you don't really notice it as you're going. And then you come to a clearing, and maybe that's for me going to a yoga class, and you're like, oh shit, like I really got over here. Like, I don't know how I ended up this far in the right direction. But yeah, it's like, I feel kind of like, and then,
I wish that listeners could see the hand gestures.
I don't notice it, and then I, do yoga, or maybe we go for a hike or something like that. I'm like, whoa, it's going to look crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's something I can relate to as well. I can get really in my head still. I mean, that doesn't just like go away right away. But I find that when I do yoga on a day-to-day basis, whether or not it's just literally unrolling my mat at home and sitting in child's pose and just closing my eyes and kind of like tuning into what's going on with me, I feel like it quiets my mind. It makes me clear on the things that are going on. And there's times, you know, as my partner in life, I feel like you see it very, very clearly with me when I'm getting really wound up. And it's just like this lack of presence. My mind is all over the place, and just sitting down and closing my eyes and moving through my body just gives me so much clarity on those things.
Yeah.
And so now it's so much more about that for me than it is the physical aspect.
And do you think that you've tried to find other activities to replace the physical aspect, or have you realized that the physical aspect that you were chasing isn't so necessary?
That's a really, really great question. And it's something that I sort of haven't found a balance with quite yet. When we came back from South America in the summer of 2014, I was very like, I need to take care of myself. I was so go when we lived in the city and I worked in a corporate job, and I put a lot of like guilt on myself if I didn't exercise, if I didn't go to the gym. I remember the first time I went to a restorative class with a friend, I didn't know I was going to restorative, and I hadn't worked out that day. And I remember lying there just feeling like, you know, like, this is nice and all, but I really wish I would have known this is what I was coming into, because otherwise I would have, you know, gone to the gym before. Like, just kind of beating myself up a little bit about not exercising. And when we came back from South America, it was very intentional to not be like that anymore. And I was pretty successful with that. I mean, I basically stopped going to the gym and started just doing yoga. And I noticed like a little change in my body. I put on a little bit of weight. My body got stronger in a lot of ways and weaker in some ways. Your cardiovascular health isn't going to be as good if you're only practicing yoga, unless you're practicing, you know, Bikram style or power yoga constantly, which I wasn't. And I've sort of come around to more listening to my body. Like, it's not about like, there's days where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go to yoga and I feel really energetic, so maybe I'll go do some cardio as well. Or being like, oh, you know, I haven't moved that much today. Like, yes, I did some yoga, so I did movement, but I haven't moved in any other way. I think something I've realized is that yoga doesn't give you everything you need in terms of your health and wellness. And I think it's important to find a balance with anything that you do, with food, with friends, alcohol, sleep, everything. You need to find balance in your life, and yoga is the same way.
Absolutely. So jumping to, we came home from South America at the middle of 2014.
Yeah, July of 2014.
And you had a plan to go somewhere. At the time, you were thinking about going to India to do yoga teacher training. And if I remember correctly, at the time, you were really looking for an adventure. It was like going off by yourself, going somewhere that's kind of challenging, doing yoga teacher training. And now doing yoga teacher training was kind of like a piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to become a yoga teacher, then I'm going to start a yoga podcast.
Like, start a business.
Do you think that you would be surprised, your 2014 self, who was going off to yoga teacher training, to find out 2 years later that you're teaching yoga and pursuing yoga as a full-on career?
So just to like sort of preface that question, so where sort of the like teacher training in 2015 thing came from is working at Lululemon, you're really encouraged to set goals. And so I actually set a goal. You and I had talked quite a bit about how it'd be really valuable for us to travel alone. We were working through some dependency stuff and just some tough times in our relationship. And we both thought it'd be really valuable to go somewhere on our own. So one of my goals for the year was to take a trip by myself. And I actually set my yoga teacher training as my 5-year goal. And I was like, within the next 5 years, I want to become a yoga teacher.
But what did that mean, become a yoga teacher?
Or it was like complete my yoga teacher training, I think was what I put down.
But did you want to be a yoga teacher?
Yeah, I did. Although if you asked me up until the point that even once I came home, it was, I don't know, I'm just going to feel it out, which is something I'd love to talk about in a little bit as we progress to me coming home with a teacher training certificate. So yes, I did. I thought it'd be cool to be a yoga teacher. I thought it'd be something that I'd be good at and that would be a fun thing to do on the side of whatever career I pursued in my future. But so at some point I was thinking about the solo trip I wanted to take. And I was like, this is so silly. Why would I wait 5 years to do my yoga teacher training when I know I want to do it? Let's just do it now. Like I might as well just do it this year. So I got permission from my manager to take a month off with a guaranteed job of coming back to Lululemon full time, which was amazing. And I started looking at places to go to, and I really wanted to go to India. It's the birthplace of yoga. It seems like the obvious place to do training if you're going to go away and have an adventure. The more I looked into it, the more terrified I became of going over to India as a single white girl. And, you know, there's a lot of mental stuff that goes along with that. A lot of my identity is tied to being a traveler. You know, at this point we have a travel podcast, and it's like, I don't want to tell people that I'm scared to go to India. Like I've been all over the world. If I've traveled Bolivia, I should be fine in India. But India just felt like this whole other monster to conquer. And I just wasn't sure if I was ready for that. And somebody told me about a teacher training. They actually told me about a teacher training that they'd done in India. Looked up this company, and they weren't running a program in India, but they had one in Bali. And it was really hard for me to pick a program. There's so many out there. There's like hundreds and hundreds, which has been interesting because a lot of the teachers I've talked to for this podcast talk about how, oh, I wanted to go away somewhere and there was only 2 programs in the entire world to choose from, or the entirety of, you know, North America. There was one international program. And I finally settled on this one in Bali. And so that's where that came from. But to answer your actual question, if somebody had told me in, I don't know, September of 2014 that, you know, in less than 2 years, you're going to be teaching yoga consistently, you know, basically full time, and you're going to have a yoga podcast and you're going to be creating a business around yoga, I would have been like, I don't think so.
So what was the stuff you said that inside your head you did want to be a yoga teacher, but you were kind of projecting outside this image of like, oh yeah, you know, we'll see what happens. I'm not like too invested in the idea.
It's like, oh, I'm too cool for school.
What do you think was behind that, behind not being assertive about being, I'm going to go get my yoga teacher training, I'm going to come home, I'm going to go out and find jobs, I'm going to do this thing?
I think it comes from my belief that I might fail in doing that, having a fear of failure, and defining failure in the way of not being successful with what I wanted to do. So defining failure like, oh, you know, if I go and I talk to Jeff Ma at the Yoga Lounge and he says, you're not good enough to teach here, then I failed. You know, if I put myself out there as a teacher, and Jeff would never say that, by the way. I just like threw that out there. I defined it failure as doing something and then not being successful with it. You're looking at me like you're puzzled.
Well, isn't that what failure is? It's not being successful at something you're doing.
Yeah, but is failure saying I really want to teach yoga and then not getting gigs right away or not getting teaching opportunities right away? Is failure putting yourself out there and being turned down by a studio because you don't have enough experience?
Sure. I mean, it's just a word.
Yeah, but it's a word that has a lot of meaning around it. And I think for me, instead of trying to dismiss the word, I have just redefined it for myself. As in, failure is not pursuing something that I really want to do and maybe it not working out at that point. Like if I reach out to somebody for this podcast and they say, no, not right now, it doesn't mean I'm a podcast failure. It just means that, you know, it doesn't mean anything more than no, not right now. Right? It's a success that I even was assertive enough and brave enough to ask, I think. And so at that time, I was just terrified of putting myself out there. And there was also a lot of my identity was sort of tied to the business degree that I had. And it was really new for us at that point. We'd come back from South America, and everyone kind of in our social network and in our family and stuff kind of wondered what was wrong with us, because we, had quit these really good corporate jobs, quote unquote good, and moved to a tiny mountain town to pursue like customer service jobs. And so I think that I was just like, I don't know if I can deal with anything more. Like, I don't know if I'm ready for it, ready to put myself out there like that. Are you genuinely shocked?
No, it's interesting. Cause I don't think we've even talked about that much.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe a little bit.
So then when you did go off and arrive in Bali and start going through your yoga teacher training, how did your perspective on yoga change from the start of yoga teacher training to the end, and your perspective on what you wanted to do with yoga during that time?
So yoga teacher trainings, every teacher training is going to be different, and the experience for every person is going to be different, even within one training. For me, I came in and I'd kind of just, I don't want to use perfected, but I'd kind of just gotten my chaturanga to a point where I was doing a good, correct, strong chaturanga. And then our first days of classes, the teacher was like, we're going to modify and only do knees, chest, chin. And it was like this slow, kind of like really easy practice. And I was like, what the hell? I thought I was going to get like fit and be awesome and like doing all these cool yoga things. And we took it back to like level 1 yoga. Like, it wasn't about who can do like the coolest asanas in this class. It was like, how are you going to teach this to every single student who walks through the door that you ever see as a teacher? And I don't know why I wasn't expecting that, but for some reason I just had it in my head that it was going to be different than what it was. And sometimes that can be hard. So for the first couple of days, I struggled with our morning practice. Cause it was so slow and it was so beginner level. And I was like, I just want to do this like sweet chaturanga that I finally know how to do, that I've been too weak to do the entire time I've practiced yoga. And it was a lot of sitting. It was a lot of looking inwards. It was a lot of understanding myself, my body, my mind, realizing the importance of the breath, which I never understood. A million times over, I'd heard teachers cue inhales and exhales, and I was kind of like, can you just stop cueing inhales and exhales so I can just move? And the breath is so key. And now I'm that teacher who's like, are we breathing? Let's breathe. Let's like not move. Let's breathe. Let's just breathe. And I just had no idea of how important it was to breathe before then. It sounds so silly. But yeah, there's lots of big learnings for me there. It was scary too. I'd never traveled without a parent or a family member or a friend or you. And so I just arrived in Bali all by myself, and it forced me to put myself out there.
And do you feel happy about the decision you made to go to your teacher training? Would you recommend other people try to mix it with an adventure if they're thinking about doing it?
I think that it's really important to do what feels right for you. I don't think that there's like one right teacher training for everyone.
Okay. But
I think for me, it was the right thing to do. I wanted to go somewhere. I wanted to do an intensive. I didn't want to be working full time and then doing teacher training once a month for a full on weekend and not look at my notes for the entire month until I arrived back again. I wanted to just be immersed in it for the entire 30 days. I wanted to be somewhere where my phone wasn't going to be on and where I could just be doing my yoga teacher training. And that's what Bali was for me. So I'm happy with it. If somebody else is thinking about that, being like, yes, that's what I need in my life, go and do it somewhere away from your work, your family, your friends, your romantic partners. Just go and do it. And to answer your question about would I recommend teacher training? Yeah, I think that like everyone should do a yoga teacher training, even if you don't like yoga or you don't want to teach, because you get so much like personal growth and development out of it.
In what way?
you just spend so much time like introspecting. Like we had lots of journaling exercises and assignments, and you just become so much more in tune with your body when, you know, there's a pose on a piece of paper that we're like, okay, let's look at that in the body. And now let's look at it in your body, and let's look at it in, you know, Chelsea's body, and let's look at it in Ryan's body, and let's like just see the bodies and see how they move. And so you get to know your body on a deeper level, which is really cool. It's this thing that we are, and we spend so little time. Like we're human, like we've got this body, and we just never really think about it on a deeper level. And so I thought that was really cool.
And then, so when you got back after yoga teacher training, what was your process like for trying to find your first yoga gig?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. My thought process before leaving Bali, and even when I returned, was like, oh, I'm not too worried about if I like teach right away. I'm just gonna, you know, see what comes, see what happens. I was really, really intimidated to come back to Canmore, where we were living, and try to teach, because there's 3 main yoga studios in Canmore and Banff, and all of them have really, really good teachers at them. And I was like, I can't teach there. Like, I have no experience. And it's this weird thing is you have the certificate that says you can teach yoga, and you've been taught all these things that you've never taught before. So you're a yoga teacher, but it's not really part of your identity yet. And it kind of feels a little bit like strange to say that, but it's sort of one of those things where you're like qualified to teach, and you just don't feel like you are that thing. Like I almost felt like to say I'm a yoga teacher when I'd never taught before, I felt like I was like a fraud or something like that.
Well, I mean, I think it seems like you're qualified kind of, but you're not really qualified to teach. You've never taught before. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like, it's those first steps into something where you don't really know how to do it, but you've got to start doing it to learn how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And so the first class that I ever taught, the first 2 classes happened completely by fluke. The first one was a friend that I know who's a yoga teacher in Banff came into Lululemon, and she was like, oh, you're back. How was your training? And I told her it was awesome. And she's like, yeah, cool. Like, do you want to teach? And I was like, yeah, I do. And she's like, okay, sweet. I need a sub for a class next Tuesday. Do you want to teach it? And I was like, yeah. Like, it's never, you're never going to feel ready is the biggest thing that I learned. Like, you've kind of just got to like walk to the edge of the diving board and just jump. And like trust that you're going to be okay, because if you stand there and analyze all the different things that can happen when you jump off the board, you're never going to jump off. Well, like
what are the things that can happen?
So that's the thing, is the worst things that are going to happen to you when you teach yoga is 1, you forget a sequence if you've planned it. 2, you cue the wrong leg or the wrong arm. 3, you say the wrong body part, which I still do. Like occasionally I'll call, you know, elbows, hands, or feet, hands, or something like that. Like it just happens. You're human. And that's the thing that's hard to remember when you're new, is you think everyone's staring at you like you've got 5 eyeballs or something like that. And you just have to be confident, and you just have to be confident in yourself, and that you know everything that you need to know. And so I said yes to this teaching opportunity, because I kind of felt like I couldn't say no. Like it would seem silly. And so the following Tuesday came around, and the following Monday came around, and had written out the sequence, and I'd practiced it myself, and I'd, you know, practiced cueing the poses that I'd never taught before in my teacher training. And then that Monday evening, I got a message from a girl I worked with at Lululemon who said like, hey girl, do you want to teach the staff meeting tomorrow morning? Because at Lululemon, your first hour is a sweat, and it's usually yoga. And at that point I was absolutely freaking out, because it was like 7 p.m. The staff meeting was in 12 hours. I was absolutely terrified, but I was also like, how cool will it be to teach these people that I've worked with for almost a year at this point, and to have that be the first yoga class that I ever teach. And so I ended up doing it. I was tired because I slept terribly the night before. I was having nightmares about forgetting cues or saying the wrong thing. I had one about my iPhone being broken and my music not working, which is so insignificant. And then I was panicking that my alarm wouldn't go off on time. And then I just showed up and taught it, and everything was fine. And it was super cool. And I'm glad that I said yes to both those classes, because they're like, I'll never get to teach yoga the first time ever again. So it's cool that those were my first 2 classes, and they're really special memories for me.
And then, so what was your plan for getting gigs as a yoga teacher at that point in time?
I had no plan. I was playing it cool.
What does that mean?
It means that I was too scared to put myself out there, uncertain of how to do it, uncertain of what I needed to do to get jobs. And not to jump ahead, but that's a lot of what inspired me to create this podcast and to create MBOM. And how I hope to grow MBOM is to really help people who are in the position that I was a year ago, who are like, yeah, cool, I've got this teacher training, I've done this 200-hour training, I've kind of skimmed the surface of what it's like to be a yoga teacher, and now I'm like let loose in the world and I have no freaking idea of how to do this.
And kind of overcoming that anxiety and fear, and just like really putting yourself out there, which you need to do.
Yeah, definitely. I remember there's a Facebook group that I'm a part of for people who are in the yoga community, Fort Canmore and Banff, and a girl that I worked with at one point when she finished her teacher training a number of months after me. I remember she posted on there and she was like, hey, I've completed my teacher training. Like, I'm available to sub. Like, message me if you need a sub. And I was like, damn, that's what you need to do. That's what I should have done. Why did I not think of this? Like, I had so much respect for her for just putting herself out there, regardless of what anyone thought, or if anyone was like, oh, she's like too new to teach for me, or, you know, people probably didn't think that. They probably just, you know, brush it over if they're not looking for teachers. But I think she got quite a few subbing and teaching opportunities. And the biggest thing is that people knew that she wanted to teach. And that is 100% my number one recommendation for anyone who's new out of a teacher training. If you want to teach, tell people you want to teach. Mm-hmm. Because the whole, like, I'm going to play it cool and maybe tell some people but not really like make it public. It's not going to, like, it doesn't work. People don't read minds.
And so we've talked about it kind of, but like, what do you think the reasons the motivators are for playing it cool?
So fear, I think, is a big one.
Fear of what?
We've already gone through this. Fear of failure.
But what does that mean?
What does fear of failure mean?
Yeah, like why?
Like, if some studio owner gives me an opportunity to teach at their studio and I suck and I completely screw it up, I'm never going to get to teach there again.
So it's kind of like fear of everyone finding out that you suck. It's not really like fear of...
I think it was a lot of things for me. It was a fear of that. It was a fear of putting myself out there, identifying myself as a yoga teacher when I didn't really feel like a yoga teacher. A fear of not being good enough.
Not being good enough for what?
Like, as a yoga teacher. It's massively intimidating to walk into a room of people who expect something out of you, and they stare at you with expectations in their eyes. They're just looking at you, and you feel like you don't know how to deliver for them. And it's one of the things that I asked, you know, yoga teachers who, quite a few yoga teachers who are more experienced than myself, is I was like, what do you do when people are just like looking at you with a blank stare in their eyes? And everything that people told me is, you don't look at them. Like, don't look at people's faces trying to get anything back from them. And I spent a long time, like I was talking about, being really externally motivated. So I was really looking for, you know, people's acceptance, people's praise, people to tell me I was good. And so I'm good at things. And so it's like I'm teaching and I feel really uncertain about myself. So I'm looking around to see, you know, are they liking it? And you don't get anything back. People are so focused. People are dealing with their own stuff. People don't smile at you. People don't like give you a thumbs up. Like, I mean, maybe if your mom's in like the back row or something like that, but for the most part, people don't do that. And it's been kind of interesting to me because I remember the second class I taught. So the two ended up being on the same day. It was the Tuesday morning and the Tuesday night, which is kind of funny. And the Tuesday night class, there was this girl that I just couldn't get a read on. I felt like she hated me. I said like at one point, like, oh, that's really beautiful. And she laughed, and I was just like, man, this is not going well. And afterwards she came up to me and was like, that class was amazing. Like, I really hope that, you know, I get to take a class from you elsewhere. You should apply at X place. They're always looking for subs. My friend works up there. And I was like, what? Really? Like, you laughed during the class. And since then I've had that a number of times, and all people who afterwards are like, wow, that class was great. And if somebody would have asked me, I would have said they hated it.
So it's kind of like this fear of really like being the center of attention. Kind of. It's like you feel like you're going to be the center of attention, but in reality, a lot of the time it's not really the case, because everyone's focused on themselves.
Yeah. And something that I've learned too is like, I've learned this through so many aspects of our life, of my life, including our podcast, is that not everybody's going to like you, and that's okay. And the first time that we received negative feedback on our podcast, I immediately felt angry. Like, I want to throw something at this douchebag who wrote something really mean on iTunes about us. Like, you don't even have the balls to like send us an email and tell us. You just leave an anonymous review, like, asshole. And then, you know, it's like you feel the same thing about, you know, somebody says something to your boss at a yoga studio, or, you know, comes up to tell you that they hate the class, which they most likely won't. They'll probably go behind your back. And fortunately, I've never had this happen, but, you know, there are people who are not going to like your class. And although I've never received direct negative feedback, I'm sure there's people who have come to my classes and been like, I didn't really like that, and I'm not going to go back to her class again. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. And being okay with that. And that's something that's really hard when you decide to enter, I mean, any form of career where...
Yeah, if you're really trying to chase something, you gotta put yourself out there and be vulnerable.
Yeah, anytime you're going to be in some form of like public eye, you've got to be okay that people aren't going to always like you. And a teacher that I really like in Atlanta, who I also interviewed for the podcast, Katie Roll, she said it really beautifully, I think on her episode, but if not to me, is that like people show up for whatever reason they show up for any yoga class. And sometimes you're just not the teacher that serves them in that moment. The things you're saying don't resonate with them. The things you're cueing don't resonate with them. They don't really like your sequences. They don't feel the things into their body that other people are feeling, and just being okay with that. And, you know, if you're not helping them along their journey or helping them in their yoga practice, encourage them to go to another teacher that can. And I thought that was something that was like it really stood out in my mind as something that I was like, okay, wow, I really need to take that into my classes.
So that's kind of like not taking it personally, accepting that it's like almost like accepting that you can't be everything to everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My business coach, Mike, said this to me yesterday. He's like, if you're trying to be everything to everyone, you're no one. I don't know if that's exactly how he said it, but like if you're trying to please every single person and you're trying really hard, like I'm going to be this person to this person and I'm going to be different for this person. I'm going to say this to make this person happy. You're not really, like you're not being yourself. You're not being authentic. And you're not really pleasing anyone by doing that.
Yeah, and you lose touch with your judgment because you don't know what people want. And
yeah.
You can do what you think is right, and you can get a good sense for what you think is right. But you're going to be kind of like lost if you're always trying to do what other people think is right. Especially when you're trying to teach like 15 people, and there's, you know, stiff dude over in the corner and like flexible chick over here on the right.
Or flexible dude and stiff chick. That happens occasionally.
Sorry for stereotypical gender roles.
Yeah.
So what have been the things that have helped you kind of, obviously over time, you're going to get more comfortable taking this role at the front of a yoga class, and you're going to get more comfortable being a bit vulnerable. But what were kind of like the inflection points or big moments where something clicked and you're like, okay, I can do this. I can put myself farther out there and I can be more assertive and vulnerable?
Yeah, that's a really great question. moving was a huge one, going into a community where I knew nobody outside of you, and really wanting to find a community of people who were like-minded, interested in yoga, and realizing that I really had to put myself out there because I didn't have friends that were going to walk into Lululemon and ask me to teach their classes, and I didn't know any yoga teachers, so I was going to have to go and meet yoga teachers. That was huge. It was hugely beneficial for not only me as a person, but also my career as a yoga teacher, because I learned so much about that process. Like auditioning for
So
getting
it's almost
positions.
Like going into a classroom and teaching, it isn't much of a big deal after you've had to go into a staff meeting at a yoga studio and audition for a pack of yoga teachers, right?
Yeah, and when you're like trying to give cues for people whose poses already look amazing because they're yoga teachers and they're auto cueing themselves in their heads, and yeah, that was one of the most intimidating experiences ever. It was crazy. Like, I couldn't stop sweating. I'm surprised that I didn't fall over during it. Like, I was so nervous. But once you do something like that, you realize that you really are capable of so much. I think things like, teaching an all levels class where I knew a few people in the class because they come to classes quite often. I know they have a strong yoga practice, and I know that they want to be challenged, and I know they want level 2 options given to them, and then having a dude show up in jeans with like chains all over his body, and he's like never done yoga before in his life. And how can I give him, like, I'm the first yoga teacher he's ever experiencing. How can I give him a good enough experience that he wants to do this ever again? Because yoga can be really sort of like exclusive.
What do you mean by that?
Like, if you come into a class and a teacher's like inhale, Ardha Uttanasana, exhale, Uttanasana, step to plank, flow through your vinyasa, meet in downward facing dog, or they even use Sanskrit for that, and you've never done yoga before, what does that mean to you? It means nothing. It's a bunch of gibberish words.
Yeah, I remember. So now I still don't know what any of those words mean, but I've been to enough yoga classes that I feel like I got the gist of the positions and what's going to come next and so forth. But I remember starting out, we'd go to a couple classes and throwing out all these Hindi, Sanskrit, I don't know. Sanskrit words. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just like constantly looking up at other people, but then also being the only dude there. I'm like, I don't want people to think I'm like creeping on you.
Yeah.
But I actually need to watch you, because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, luckily you continued going back to yoga for whatever reason. But that's a really intimidating situation. And you've got, these people who also know what you usually teach, and they come in there expecting to get that same practice that they always have. It's not like you can just become a beginner's class for whatever reason. And then also learning things about planning classes. So I really like to have some form of idea of what I'm teaching before I walk into the room. And the more I've taught, the more I've realized that you really need to be open to being flexible with the things that you're going to teach based on what your students need. And that's not always easy when you're new. It's really hard, actually. It's teaching yoga. There's a lot going on. There's this balance between demoing and watching your students and giving cues that are going to be relevant to the people in the room, and watching for people who are really doing poses incorrectly to the point where they could hurt themselves, and, making moves to go correct that. And then I've had things like, people coming to the door of the studio and trying to ask questions when you're in the middle of a class. And sometimes the occasional person will speak up and say something that can be really distracting. And I've had moments where I thought I was teaching one style of yoga, and I show up and the schedule is actually different than what I thought. And it's like, the immediate thing is like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And then just coming back to this, like, don't panic. You know that you know everything you need to know. And it's something that was really taught to us at our teacher training. The main teacher there, her name was Sunny, and she was annoyingly like, you'll know everything you need to know when you need to know it. And I was like, what the hell is this bull crap that you're telling us? Like, I don't understand this. And I feel like now that I'm fully into teaching, I really understand it because it's all in my brain. It's just being confident in myself that I can pull it out when I need it.
Mm-hmm. And so after 1 year of teaching yoga,
woo,
has anything changed about the direction you want to go with your yoga career?
I mean, hugely. Like, I have a yoga podcast now and I'm aiming to create a business around that. So that's definitely not something that I ever predicted to be in my future. So that's really cool. This podcast has been hugely beneficial for my own growth and hopefully for all the listeners out there as well. I've had the opportunity to connect with so many amazing people. And
so, let's stop and talk about what are the kind of most important things you feel like you've learned from talking to people on the podcast?
So I said what I learned from Katie, who's one of my really close friends and somebody that I deeply admire as a yoga teacher, is just being okay if somebody doesn't like your class, because it might not necessarily be about you. It might be more about them. Something that I've learned through Erin Evans, who I had on the podcast, who teaches in Banff, is you're good enough the way you are. So don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be your teacher. Don't try to be, Sean Korn or Baron Baptiste or whoever it is that you deeply admire. Don't try to be that person. Try to be just you. Know that whatever Amanda Kingsmith has to offer is equally as good as every other yoga teacher out there.
Is it?
Hey.
But so if you've got 40 years of yoga teaching experience and you're like a master, obviously you've got way more to offer than a person who just started.
Yeah. So something I really like, and Yohai Weiss said this, he teaches in Atlanta, and I interviewed him for the podcast, and I don't know if his episode's going to be out before this one or not, but if not, then this is a little teaser for the episode. Something he really said is imitate, integrate, innovate is the stages of teaching. And so it's, you kind of imitate these things you're told, and then you integrate the things that are true to you, and then you innovate from there.
Yeah.
And so he's been teaching for, 3 years now, and he's like, I'm in the integration phase now. And so I think what Erin's saying is not like, it's not that you can't take things from other people or you can't find inspiration from other people, because that's hugely important. But it's knowing that to be a good yoga teacher, you don't need to be Sean Korn. If Sean Korn's, if you're not like her, you're not Sean Korn. You can't just like go up and just try to imitate this person. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what Yohai said was hugely valuable to me. Lydia Zamorano said something that really kind of clicked for me kind of after we interviewed. At the time she was like, does that make sense? And I was like, yeah, I think so. And I wasn't like too certain if it did. But she was talking a lot about like finding your own truth. And so I was like, I don't really know what this means. And I feel like I've gotten it a little bit more in the last couple of months. And she was talking about how when you first start teaching, it's really amazing to go to other teachers' classes and kind of like collect ideas and get cueing ideas. And then from there, you can transition into finding what you know to be true in your own body, and you can find what's true to you as a teacher. And I think that that's something that's really spoken to me in the last little bit. You look puzzled.
It's just, I find it, I don't know. Something like that, for example, finding your own truth. Like it's words, but they don't necessarily mean anything.
So it's like,
it seems like a thing that happens sometimes in yoga where there's like kind of speaking in like vague, kind of magical language.
Yeah, that's kind of what I felt when she said it. I was like, okay, wow, I don't know where this is going or what you're talking about.
Because then you can interpret it to mean anything.
So how I've kind of taken it to be is, say I go to Katie's class or Lydia's class. And she says, okay, we're going to come into triangle pose this way, and this is where you should feel it in your body. And maybe I'm like, I'm just there to absorb. So I'm taking in. And then one day I move into it and I'm like, but what if I move into it from this way? Or what if I, just turn a little bit like this and it feels different for me? That's what I take to be discovering my own truth. And something she said too is like not just regurgitating things that you hear in classes, like moving in your own body. So really important to keep a personal practice, whether or not it's at home or with other teachers or a mix of both.
So kind of like being authentic to what you think is right or what works for you.
Yeah, definitely. And then something that Jeff Ma said in episode 1 that really resonated with me as a new teacher who's trying to find a teaching job, or just anyone who's looking for a teaching gig. He owns a yoga studio in Canmore, and he's like, I think about my students at my yoga studio like my kids. He's like, if somebody sends me an email and they're like, hey, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm really awesome, I'd love to teach at your studio. He's like, if a babysitter sent me an email that I'd never met and they're like, hey, I want to babysit your 2 kids, I'm really credible, I'm awesome, he'd be like, no effing way are you coming under my roof and babysitting my kids. I'm not leaving you alone with my children. He's like, that's the exact same way that I feel when yoga teachers who I've never met send me like blind emails into my inbox and want to teach my students. He's like, you don't get to teach my kids.
So what is the way to get to teach the kids?
Oh, fabulous question, Ryan. I think that it is to show your face in person. It seems to be a consistent thing that I hear from almost every yoga studio owner that I've talked to for the podcast and that I've encountered in my career, is that making yourself present at the studio. And one studio owner that I've taught for asked me, one of the first questions she asked me is, she was like, could you see yourself teaching here? Does this studio teach the way that you teach? And that's a really important question, because as much as you want to teach and you want to make money, it's really important to know that how your style of teaching is going to fit with that studio, right? So as much as that studio owner wants to make sure you're a good fit, you should make sure you're a good fit as well. And I call it kind of your personal brand. Make sure your brand fits with the studio's brand. If that makes sense.
So coming to classes,
talking to people,
meeting the teachers, trying to meet the owner if they teach a class, and kind of networking around that community.
Yeah, and you have to put yourself out there in that case. Like skulking around a yoga studio and just like making yourself seen is not good enough to get a job. You have to talk to that person and be like, hey, I love what you're doing here. I'm a teacher. Do you have any opportunities? Do you have karma classes? Do you have a sub list I could get on? Could I do a demo for you? Can I send you a video of my teaching? Can I send you testimonials that my other students have written for me? And a lot of that is a lot harder when you're a newer teacher and you haven't taught that much. And in that case, maybe it's like, I'm newer and I'm looking for experience. So if they don't have a karma class, maybe you can assist, maybe you can adjust, maybe you can sit in and just observe. I think that something that's really key is not saying no. Taking the opportunities that you can get that feel right for you.
And so you're kind of hitting on it, but what would you do differently, or what would you do if you were starting like over again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really don't like to have regrets. I know that you and I kind of differ on this. I don't like to think about how it would change my life, because I think that my life has gone in a path that's really helped me to learn. But if I could give advice to somebody who is just coming out of their teacher training or who's new, from what I know now, I would tell them to be assertive. If you want to teach, tell people that you want to teach. Be honest about where you're at as a teacher. Don't pretend like you're more experienced or better than you are. Ask what's available. Tell other people. And Tara Koenig said it on the episode that we talked about the Africa Yoga Project, but she said, you never know when the bug that you've put in somebody's ear becomes relevant. You've told somebody, yeah, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm looking for yoga teaching jobs at the moment. And then that person's talking to a friend. She's like, oh, my back's really hurting. Maybe I should get into yoga. Do you know anything about yoga teachers in the area? And they're like, oh, light bulb goes off. Yeah, this person actually told me that they're teaching. You just never know when you can get connected.
And even people who you don't think are relevant. You might know someone, or maybe they turn out wanting to do a private class or something like that, right?
Yeah, and that's something I would really recommend to people who are newer too. See if you can get private clients, even if you charge them a really low rate, because my first set of private clients has helped me to grow so much as a teacher. It's helped me to let go of this idea that I have to come in with a plan and just work with what they need in that day, and just be there for them as a teacher and to teach them the things that I know, which has been really cool. And it's definitely people that I definitely wouldn't have put them in like the yogi niche. But it was just talking about how I'm a teacher and I'm wanting to teach more. And they're like, well, we could use more yoga in our life because we have no yoga in our life currently. And now we do a regular once a week, which is honestly a highlight of my week. It's super, super fun.
Yeah. And I think it's remembering, as someone new, you might not have the same experience or value in experience, but your advantage is being able to teach for a low price and being like, shameless about undercutting people.
Sorry, not sorry.
Just like, oh, hey, X yoga teachers teaching, X yoga studios teaching for X, like $15 a class. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to start a class and make it $750, half the price.
Yeah, and it's knowing what value you're offering that person too. When I think about teachers that I really highly admire and respect, like I think that, when I go to price myself as a private, I think about, what are those other teachers going to give these people in an hour and a half that I'm not going to, because I just don't have that experience and I don't have that knowledge. So I think that and it's not to say that I won't get there, but I think that, charging a lower rate if you're newer is like a very valid thing, because then people feel like they're getting more bang for their buck.
And you get the value out of getting more experience.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
So to kind of get back to that, it's, the kind of steps you'd take as a new yoga teacher would be kind of spreading around to new yoga studios, networking, being assertive, and just like towing that line of annoyance about telling people that you're a yoga teacher.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to, there's so many memes about like veganism where it's like, there's one where there's a dude at a urinal and all the urinals are empty, and this other dude like comes up and he's like, goes to the urinal that's right beside the other dude and he goes, hey man, I'm a vegan. And I have nothing against vegans or veganism. I think plant-based diets are a really amazing thing. But the point of me saying that is that like, maybe don't go that far, because people know when people are vegan because vegans tell them they're vegan. Like, pretty early on for the most part. And I have a lot of really amazing...
That's the joke.
Yeah. And I have a lot of really amazing friends, so I feel so about saying that. But that meme resonated to me as something that, I mean, I'm gluten-free, and it's something that I want to be aware of when I'm gluten-free, is I'm not like, 5 minutes into the conversation like, oh, I'm gluten-free, I don't eat bread. And I also don't want to be like, oh, I'm a yoga teacher, like every 5 seconds.
Yeah. I remember you kind of went through this period of like, when can I say that I'm a yoga teacher?
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like, once you were like, I'm saying it. And then things kind of started to happen. Probably coincidence, but do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of touches on what I talked about earlier, where I came back from teacher training. I didn't have any like identity around being a yoga teacher. So I felt like a fraud to say it. And I felt that way for quite a number of months. It was like, okay, yes, I like teach yoga occasionally because I'm not being assertive and I'm not going out and making this happen for myself. But I don't really feel like I'm like a yoga teacher. And I don't know. I just started teaching more until I was like, one day I was just like, I'm a yoga teacher. Like, I don't know. There's no like number of classes or hours, or I think that being assertive about things right off the get-go is really important. And I think that that's, hopefully I'm not alone with this, but I think that it's something in general, that I kind of deal with in my life. Like I know when we started our podcast, I didn't really tell people about it. And then all of a sudden people are like, wait, what's this podcast thing you do? And now I'll tell people, you know, quite often, like if people ask me what I do, it's I teach yoga and I'm also a podcast host. And it's this really cool conversation we have around it. Whereas before I would just kind of be like,
oh, I do stuff.
Well, it was like, oh, I work at Lululemon. It was like nothing more than that, even though I was doing like other really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that don't be ashamed to identify yourself as a yoga teacher as soon as you've got your training. And I mean, even before then, tell people I'm doing this training to become a yoga teacher. I'm so excited. I think that that's really cool.
And do you think you felt a little bit of that, I don't know, imposter syndrome around your online course, your Udemy yoga course?
Oh, way to plug that in there. Yeah, I think so. I'd never really thought about it that way, but yeah, I think so.
And it's kind of like around selling, right?
Yeah. So are you asking because I just released it or not being like...
Oh, no, I was just wondering if you think the same things kind of are at play.
Yeah, I think it is the same thing. I think it's the same as, you know, releasing a podcast. And it takes a while before you feel, or for me at least, to feel comfortable being like, yes, I am this. And, you know, kind of slapping that label on myself. I even struggle with writer. I'm like, am I a writer? Nobody's paid me to write anything, but, you know, I like writing. So, and something, I mean, it's one of the tags in my email signature. So I feel like I'm rolling with it. And I think that it's important to put those things out because you never know that person who's like, hey, I see you're a writer. Do you want to write something for me? Yeah,
it's kind of funny. I think my perspective on it has changed a bit, where before I was kind of like a bit hesitant to make that move. But from like looking around and hearing people's stories, it seems like people who do get to be successful at things, like they make that jump and they're like, I am this. And I think that it does influence you psychologically, right? Like if you keep telling people that you're a writer or you're a yoga teacher and they're like, oh, where do you teach? And you're like, oh, nowhere yet. I think it kind of lights this fire in you to make that happen, kind of maybe subconsciously. And it also gets that information out to other people.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that.
And you don't have to wait around for the world to say, okay, yes, here you go. You can just like seize what you want. Yeah, that's... I mean, I think there's probably some line, right? Like there's probably some inappropriate uses of it, but for the most part, like if you're, for example, like, oh, hey, I'm a psychologist because you want to be a psychologist, that seems a little sketchy.
Or like, I think that something that's really important, especially about a yoga teacher, is the things you are not. You are not a doctor. You are not a chiropractor. You are not a PT. You are not any of those things. Well, maybe you are, but if you are, you are. And if you have the training for them and you are those things, then you are. But otherwise you are not if you are.
Just in case anyone is confused.
But it's something that when you teach a yoga class, people will ask you like, oh, I've got this weird like ligament pain in the back of my knee. Do you think you could like poke around at it? No. No, I cannot. You should see your GP about that.
So what are the next steps for you in your vision to become a yoga teaching master?
I think that growing MBOM is something that's really kind of front of line for me right now. Creating more resources for people who are just like me, who were like me a year ago, and who really want to teach but are either struggling with fear or don't know how to create a resume or who don't know what their goals are for their career. I think that I've learned so much and I really want to share that wealth of knowledge with people So that's a big thing for me. And then just continuing to teach. And I feel like I'm on this crazy roller coaster ride that's kind of just taken off, and I just want to keep going with it. I want to keep the momentum I have with my teaching right now and continue to learn as much as I can.
But specifically, in terms of teaching, like what are the moves?
What are the analytical
numbers? I need to know so I can make those moves myself.
Okay. I would like to, I don't know if I know the specifics. I don't know.
But like, so for one example, like we're going to be moving. Whoa, voice crack. We're going to be moving
26
to a new city.
13.
So you're going through that experience again of putting yourself out there, hustling to get jobs.
Yeah, so I want to keep, so that's what I meant. I want to keep the momentum of my teaching. So I don't want moving to a new city to kind of put me back in this slump of like, I'm going to play it cool, which I don't think it's going to, because I've learned so much about not playing it cool. But being assertive, being confident in the year of teaching that I have under my belt now, and continuing to realize that I by no means know it all. Getting more education is something that I definitely want to do. I'd really love to do a workshop or a teacher training on adjustments. We cover that in a 200 level, but on a very basic sort of level. Something I'm also really, really becoming interested in is just the idea of movement in general and the way that the body moves. I want to learn more about the spine and the way our body's joints move. I don't really come from a anatomy background in any way, so the anatomy that I know is very basic. I'd like to know more about that. So Bree Johnson, who was on the podcast, is just absolutely fabulous when it comes to stuff like that. She's up in Edmonton, Alberta. So I've already been looking to see if there's any way that I can connect with her while we're back in Alberta. And then pushing myself outside my comfort zone. We're going to travel Central America sometime in the next 6 months. So I don't know, maybe teaching in Spanish, maybe teaching expats in a community, hopefully getting more private clients down the line. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for the most part.
I didn't give you the specifics. One thing I will tell you that just from my experience in like the studio world and my own personal experience as I've taught more classes is I don't think that teaching 18 to 20 classes a week and being full-time only doing yoga teaching is for me. And I think it's wonderful if it is for you out there and that's what you're doing, or it's helping you to progress towards whatever your goal is, maybe of owning a yoga studio. Owning a yoga studio isn't my goal. It's not my dream. And I feel way too exhausted, even at the thought of teaching 20 classes in a week. I've never done it, and I don't think I ever want to. So that I know that I don't want. And I think that that's cool too. Figure out what you don't want from what you see other people doing, from what you see yourself doing. I think I taught like 10 classes or something, and I was just like, no more yoga. Get it away. I don't ever want to feel like get it away with something that I'm so passionate about. So.
All right. Is there anything else to cover on this episode?
I don't think so.
Kingsmith?
If you guys are enjoying the podcast, definitely check out the show notes on the website, www.mbomyoga.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there. When you sign up for the newsletter, I'll send you a 5-step guide for kickstarting your career as a yoga teacher. If you want all 10 steps, it's up on the website. It's super affordable, so you can buy that in the store. The store is recently launched, so I'm super excited about that. And then you can find me on social media. Facebook, Mastering the Business of Yoga, Instagram and Twitter at Amanda Kingsmith. And you can follow my journey. If you have any stories that you want to share, questions, comments, feedback, I'd love to hear from you. It's info@mbomyoga.com. I think those are enough plugs for this episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Ryan. If anyone is interested in hearing Ryan and I banter more, I talk a little bit less in the regular episodes. Ryan talks a little bit more. It's the World Wanders podcast, and it's www.theworldwanders.com.
It is. That's correct.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.